Tim, I have a question for you.
Oh, man.
Okay. I know. Just hang in there. Okay.
All right.
It's not a tough question. I know you don't handle those well, so this is easy.
I'm just tired of them.
Okay. All right, here it is. So we've both done a lot of work with companies who have asked us to help improve their corporate cultures.
Yep.
And one systematic way to do that, at least that we've seen positive results with, is in putting together, is using recognition or building a recognition system or platform.
Yeah. Okay. Is there a question here?
Okay. All right. Well, before I ask the question, let's hear from an expert on the topic.
What I've been working with a lot of folks on is this idea of gratitude and how we practice gratitude as an intentional discipline that allows us to live life in such an appreciative framework so that we can slow down and we can see the things that are around us.
Okay, that's the voice of Brad Shuck, a professor of psychology and organizational behavior at the University of Louisville. He's been researching the impact that gratitude can have on culture and performance for many years. So, Tim, my question to you is this. In your work in the field, have you seen situations where gratitude has made a positive difference in a work culture?
Many times. The answer is a big yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I remember doing some work for a global computer manufacturer some years ago. Their culture was so bad that they had 10,000 employees leaving voluntarily every month.
What?
Oh,
That's
God.
crazy.
The CEO asked us to see if we could stop the bleeding. And the first thing we did was install a recognition platform and train managers on how to use it, to thank employees, just to show them gratitude for the work that they were doing.
And what happened? Did a platform make a big difference?
It did. It basically shut down the mass migration away from the company in about 6 months. Now, just to be completely fair, there were other organizational changes that were being made at the same time, but the recognition platform ended up being a huge contributor to it.
Yeah. Now, that's amazing, but not that surprising. And I think we all understand, at least at some level, that we want to work in a place where we feel valued. And one thing that Brad notes in that clip is that to feel valued sometimes, it's not just about the recognition, but hey, slowing down is also really important.
Yeah. He's not talking about slowing down the progress or productivity of an organization. I think what he's talking about is actually just the opposite.
Exactly. Brad's saying that in order to speed up, to improve our innovation and productivity, we often need to slow down.
Yeah. Now, that's going to make for an interesting discussion.
Welcome to Behavioral Grooves, the podcast that explores our human condition. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. As you heard, we're teeing up a conversation that we had with Brad Shuck, a professor at the University of Louisville and past collaborator with both Kurt and me. Now, we sat down with Brad a few weeks ago and recorded a couple of different sessions. Now, the first was what we called a Groove Jam, which was a video-first format. It was super fun. You can find that on our YouTube channel. Just Google Behavioral Grooves Groove Jam video. And in the Groove Jam, we talked about a grand hypothetical question. If you could give up one vice or the rest for your life, what vice would that be? It was fun.
That was a really cool conversation, this Groove Jam that we had. But it was only the first part of this conversation. The second is what we recorded and that you're going to hear now. This is an episode where we're going to talk about some of the elements that Brad is doing some research on to improve the functionality and productivity of organizations. And in this conversation, we'll cover 3 important elements that impact the quality of culture and productivity for an organization. The first is to focus on gratitude, what we just talked about, and the ways that you can integrate gratitude into your daily work life. The second is culture and how culture thrives in the bottom-up environment, not just a top-down environment.
Yes. The third thing that we're going to cover is the importance of psychological safety.
As if we haven't heard that one before.
True enough. But Brad's got some insights that are definitely worth tuning in for.
Okay. With that, Groovers, we hope that you sit back and relax with an icy cold draft of Make Your Company Better Brew and enjoy our conversation with Brad Shuck.
Brad Shuck, welcome to Behavioral Grooves again.
So good to be back, guys. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Always.
One of my most quoted guests. You are one of my most quoted guests. I use your quotes in presentations. I use your quotes in conversations. I love having you on because there's always something that I will be able to take and then use in my own life. So I really appreciate it. So
you guys are so kind. I was so glad. And steal it all and just put your name behind it. Just take it.
I attribute it to Brad Shuck all the time, and your picture comes up sometimes and everything. So there you go.
Thank you, Kurt.
All right. So we're going to start with a speed round, and I will have to say we've had you on the show a couple different times, and I'm quite surprised at this. But we never asked you our go-to speed round question. We asked you hamburger, hot dog. We asked you up the mountain, down the mountain, Coke, Pepsi. But we have never asked you coffee or tea.
Oh, coffee.
Oh,
coffee.
Maybe that was why. Maybe we knew that it was just like, there wasn't even a question mark there, right? So
coffee.
Okay.
We homebrew here. So
homebrew.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So what does that mean?
Does that mean you grow your own beans in the back?
That's the only thing we don't do.
Okay.
We grind them fresh. We pull shots in the morning. Like it's a thing in the morning here at the Shuck House. Yep.
Is it a ritual? Would you consider it a ritual?
100%. And then in the summers, we have cold brew coffee or cold brew espresso. And then in the winter times, we have our hot drinks. We have our lavender honey espressos. We have our pumpkin spice. We have, oh yeah. We have the rosemary lavender is super good. Yep. Coffee.
Okay. Well, I think this is going to make the second speed round question even more interesting because you live in Kentucky. You are a meat man. We know that about you. Mm-hmm. Would you rather smoke meat or barbecue meat?
So that's a trick question because maybe there's some similarities, but I would go with smoke. I would rather smoke meat, like smoke a brisket, smoke a pork shoulder. Yeah.
Would you rather eat grilled meat or smoked meat?
Smoked meat. 100%. Yeah.
And now when you do your smoking, this is like a 24-hour, 12-hour, right? This isn't just a simple little, hey, we're putting this on. Mm-mm. You are infusing and doing all sorts of things. Yes.
There's like 3 days of prep work that goes into this.
Oh my gosh.
And there's tools and there's vents and there's like wood involved. Yeah, absolutely.
Is there a barometric pressure analysis?
It's totally different. Like it's different to smoke in the winter than it is to do it in the summertime. 100%. Wow. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. The condensation on the outside of the smoker changes based upon the pressure outside and the weather. And it's kind of like a badge of honor to like be in a snowstorm and like smoking a brisket. Like I'm kind of badass. Like I'm really good. Like this makes me feel rough.
Feel like a drummer?
Yeah, like a drummer. That's how a drummer feels. Exactly.
Yeah, Tim was being facetious about that question, and there was actually some truth behind it. Wow, that's kind of interesting. Okay, speed round. We're moving on.
Got it.
All right. Do you call it a bacon and tomato sandwich or a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich?
There's no need for lettuce. It gets in the way.
It's a BLT.
Don't put lettuce. Don't put lettuce on
it. Go to the restaurant. It's a BLT.
No. And the ratio to tomato to bacon matters.
Okay.
It matters. It matters. Yeah.
You need thick. And would that ratio be what? What is that ratio?
You need a giant slice of tomato. Giant. And some thick cut bacon.
So actually, bread. It's the ratio to bread, bacon, tomato. It is not just. It's like, is the bacon as thick as the piece of bread? Is that kind of how that works?
It should be pretty good sized. And if you don't put mayo on it, you're a savage. Like you shouldn't even be eating it.
Just a warning to all listeners: you will not find your groove if you do not put
mayo.
You have to have mayo. You just don't miss it.
You guys are asking questions about things that I have very strong opinions on.
Okay. Okay.
I've done some background research on your Facebook page just to let you know there was a little bit of that going on.
I love it.
I think there was something about your tomato sandwich, bacon tomato sandwich from your grandmother or grandparents,
yes,
right?
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right. That's right.
Okay. Last speed round question. Something that you have strong opinions on, and this should be a super easy one as well. What is the one thing that companies get wrong about employee engagement?
That it's an event or program, and it's a campaign and an experience.
And what should it be?
It should be that campaign. It should be. So oftentimes people will say, like, I'll drop in to do a keynote for an hour, and they're like, and sometimes they're like, you got 35 minutes. 35 minutes. Okay, sure. Like, we can do that. We can talk. But if you really want sustained change over time, you are looking at creating experiences, not events.
And are those experiences pieces? How does that work? What is it that is it baked into the everyday processes? Is it something that is on top of those? Is it some combination of all of those things? I work with a lot of leaders, and I think sometimes they struggle with understanding this.
When I go in to work with an organization, my favorite way to do this is that we have multiple touch points over time. I find that it can be hard to keep the ball moving because we get so distracted, and leaders are really busy people, and they've got a bunch of different things. And the minute they leave a workshop, they're going back to their office and their emails exploded, and they've got this challenge and this opportunity, and they're pursuing this and that. By the end of the day, they've only gotten half of that stuff done. They kind of come back and do that again tomorrow. And I find my role has more and more been a voice who can come into the room and say, how's it going in this area? Let's spend a little bit of time focusing on whatever this goal is, or however we set that up. But those extended periods of touch points have been really, really helpful, because I don't think it's a reasonable expectation for us to put more on somebody's plate. I was just up in Minnesota working with a really, really great company. And one of the leaders in the back of the room said, I'm already really busy. You're right. And I think acknowledging that is important. I think it helps people feel seen.
Talk a little bit more about the context. That's an interesting comment that this leader said, I'm already busy.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about the context in which that was made, and what do you think that he or she meant by that?
Yeah, so I'll tell a different story to tie into that. I was Great. You guys remember the compassionate leadership stuff that we talk about, the above the line, below the line behaviors. And I was presenting that. I was actually in India, and there was a young woman in the back of the room who was a rising star in the company, and she raised her hand, and she was really angry with me. And she said, you mean I have to do all those things? I have to treat people with dignity, and I have to be authentic, and I have to be present, and so you're telling me there's more things for me to do. And I recognized at that moment, and even as I've talked more about above the line, below the line behaviors, it isn't about adding to someone, but oftentimes we feel that way. Like there's more things for me to do, and I don't have time to do these things. And so this guy's telling me I've got more stuff to do. Rather, it's the approach, and it's the fundamental sense of presence that I have with people in the moment. I have recently started to work with folks who need to undergo significant fundamental change. And we use the analogy of climbing up a mountain, and that as we scale that mountain, and you guys have had guests on who have climbed mountains before,
literally,
and talked about this. And as you ascend up the mountain, the behaviors that you use at base camp don't work the same way that they do at base camp or at camp 3 and 4 and 5, because the risk tolerance goes up. And so we have to change the way we behave. And so I think about leaders in that space saying, well, I've already got a bunch of stuff to do. Yes, but what got you here won't get you there. And if you want to get there, you have to fundamentally change some things.
I think that is brilliant. I'm working with a couple leaders right now. I want you to come in and tell them that. And there are some pieces of that. One of the things that I heard you say, and correct me if I have misunderstood this, is that you come in at these points as a element to kind of stop, to take a pulse, to maybe slow down. And one of the things that I have been seeing with some of the work that I've been doing is that leaders feel like they have to keep going. They're going. There's so much to do. There's always too much on their plate. And sometimes what I tell them is you just need to slow down. By actually slowing down, you will speed up. There will be value in taking the time to pull your team together, to talk with them, to check in with them. That will then lead to better things in the future that otherwise come into issue. Did I capture any of that there?
Absolutely. And the intentional slowness there is intentional.
Yes.
In that we do need to pause, and we do need to do better, to do less better. And if I can do less better in my life, then I can speed up in these other areas that allow me to get some things done. The other thing that I recommend for, in particular for executive teams, is you need to have an opportunity to just have some fun with your team. I was with a group of executives, and these are, they're typical. They're type A, they're going fast, they're doing their thing. And we were having a team building offsite, a strategic planning offsite at a casino. And as a part of the exercise to think about risk tolerance, which is what they wanted to focus on, we learned how to play blackjack. Like, what does it mean to sit at a blackjack table and risk, and how does these lessons translate over into a business environment? And I remember we were kind of done with the team building. And I turned back around and I saw every executive smiling. And they weren't doing anything business related. They weren't doing anything productive. They weren't looking at a sheet. They weren't looking at a PowerPoint. They were just together. And that sense of togetherness and that belonging was so critical in the next phase of our development together. And I remind them of that all the time. Remember when we did this and you guys were just smiling. And that was a real key moment for us.
Brad, you've been researching employee engagement issues and related issues for 20 some years. Yeah. What is happening these days? Can you give us a little bit of insight into trends, or what has changed or what might be changing? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. So I think it has changed in some ways. The remote piece of this, I think, is a layer. The interpersonal relationships that people have is a layer. I think right now there are really two major trends, and those trends center around belonging and purpose. And if we have a sense of belonging in our work and with our team, and for me, this extends beyond just the workplace, but like if I feel connected to my family, or I feel connected to my neighbors and my community, then I'm willing to give of myself in those spaces. Mm-hmm. But when I feel a sense of disconnect and isolation from those spaces, then I'm less likely to extend myself in ways that might be helpful for everybody that is around me. My wife used to be a kindergarten teacher, and she had a saying, and this is completely attributable to her. I take no credit for this. We can do hard things together. And I think that's true. Like when work gets stressful or there's a tough project, if I know I've got people around me and I belong, I think that matters in the moment. I really, really do.
And then you talked about purpose. So how does purpose pull into this?
So I think knowing that my work has a degree of meaning to it, like I'm doing something that matters in the world, or I'm doing something that matters to the team. And I was recently with a group, and I said, well, what's your goal? And so they set here's the financial goal and the shared services piece of that equation. So it could be maybe HR or finance or something like that. We're like, well, we don't sell. So how do we connect with that goal in a meaningful way? I said, well, how does your team think that they connect to that goal? What are the ways and what are the artifacts in the organization that tell each member that their work matters? And how can we specifically connect back projects or efficiencies or programs or things that we put in place that then help support that? But I think that sense of purpose and the degree of meaning and work become essential. We're really good as human beings of pushing away from the table from the things that don't add value in our life. And we just choose to use our energy in other places. And that's also true for us at work in so many cases.
Yeah. It sounds like you're talking about there's a big P, this purpose of what the organization is doing out there. But there's also these smaller P's of I'm adding value to this team so that they can do their job easier, better, whatever that would be. And I'm making their life easier, better, however it would be.
Yeah. I love how you phrase it. I haven't thought about it like that. An organization does have a large P, like they've got this purpose thing of that. But I think the little P focus there is so localized. Yeah. And so it becomes really important. And I do often ask, what are the artifacts of both belonging and purpose here? Like, show me, how would someone know they belong? How would someone know that their work has purpose? And what are the messages that we send? And I encourage folks to constantly remind, like, hey, thank you so much for doing this because this helped me do this. And that, I think, really drives a sense of purpose at work.
Can you tell us a little bit about what some of your most recent research is focused on, Brad?
Yeah, we talked about the biological piece, the biological work that we've done, where we've really looked at how work is physically impacting people biologically, and we continue that work. It's very interesting to see not only how work impacts things like risk for chronic disease, but also like how it drives things like gratitude and appreciation, and how it can help us live a really fulfilled life. When we know that we're accomplishing something, we're doing something that's worthwhile, and I'm digging into this, there's a piece of accomplishment that comes along with that. What I've been working with a lot of folks on is this idea of gratitude and how we practice gratitude as an intentional discipline that allows us to live life in such an appreciative framework so that we can slow down and we can see the things that are around us. Sometimes we're moving so quickly, we don't even see things.
How does that work if the company culture is like, look, we don't have time for gratitude. Get your damn job done. Just go and get it done. And when you're done, if you've done it well, then maybe I'll thank you.
Yeah. So gratitude is hard. And some people aren't ready. I've certainly worked with those kinds of companies and those kinds of leaders before. And what I find is showing them, helping them feel the benefit of that on a personal level. So we might ask questions like, can you think of a time in the last 6 months when you were just really grateful for something? And can you describe it? When was it? Where were you? Who was around you? What was happening? And then have them tell that story back can help them tap into their own sense of like, this is how it's moved the needle for me. Or can you think of a time when you were recently recognized? How'd you feel? What was it like? One of the things we've been working a lot with leaders on is that, so back to the above the line, below the line piece. Where does that come from? Like how do people develop a sense of dignity? Like where does that virtue come from, or authenticity or integrity? It doesn't operate like a light switch. Like you can't go buy more of it. You can't get more of it. Like it has to come from someplace. And we've been working with leaders to unlock the power of their own story in their life. And so we'll ask them things like, where in your life have you seen someone extend dignity? And can you tell that story? And for some folks, that's really powerful. And what I've realized is that there are some people, there are some leaders, they've never seen that before. So they don't know it's accessible. And so as other people tell their stories, they see models of how this has operated in the world. And only at that moment does it become an accessible tool for them.
Hey, this is Kurt, and we want to say thanks for listening to Behavioral Grooves. And we hope that you're enjoying this episode, but it feels a little bit one-sided. You're hearing from us, but we're not hearing from you.
This is Tim, and we have 2 suggestions to remedy that. The first is join our Facebook page and engage with us.
We want to talk with you. We want to hear your perspectives, and hopefully our Facebook page might be the place to have some of that interaction. So please come and join us.
The other recommendation we have for you is to leave us a quick rating. You know, the little 5-star thing at the bottom of your app, or a short review. Just leave us a few words about what you like about behavioral groups. We'd very much appreciate it.
Thanks, and we now return you to our regularly scheduled programming. Brad, I know we talked about this in our first time we talked with you, the above the line and below the line, but for our listeners, so they don't have to go back and re-listen to that. Yeah. Although it's a great episode, go back and listen to it. Episode 91, I believe. But can you just talk real quickly, like what is above and below the line as you're talking about that?
Yeah. So above the line are those distinguishable characteristics of leader behavior that really drive a positive culture. In the research we did, we called it compassionate leadership. Yeah. I find that the word compassion oftentimes will turn off an executive very quickly. And so we use above the line and below the line. And so above the line behaviors are things like dignity, empathy, authenticity, and below the line behaviors, for example, are things like humiliation, insincerity, distractedness, dishonesty. The idea being, if I'm not working from a place of dignity, then I may be working from a place of humiliation. And so if I'm working from a place of humiliation, where does that come from? Why do I do that? Oftentimes in stressful situations, we drop below the line and we will use avoidance or distractedness or humiliation at times, unfortunately. And so the idea being that it takes a lot of courage to work above that line. But I find that that's where like gratitude lives. Mm. That's where appreciation lives. And for those who are below that line, they often come into workshops or classes that I teach at the university. And there's a lot of shame and guilt that are associated with that. And so we just help unpack some of that stuff.
It's interesting as you talk about that above the line, below the line, and how it shows up. I deal with leaders sometimes who want to be above the line, but sometimes they fall back inadvertently or unintentionally into some of those below the line. They want to give people a space, but they're calling in from vacation, or they're emailing at 3 a.m. on a Saturday night, and sure. They're not thinking that everybody has to do that, but the unintended message that they are sending is not necessarily that. Do you see that? And how do leaders deal with that?
Yeah. I mean, I do that.
I do it too. I mean, I
also do those things. And I think it's that piece of acknowledgement, right? So the fact that I can say, look, I get this wrong on the daily, like I get this wrong all the time. Where I try to spend my time then is saying, well, what's the next best decision? So let's say, for example, I lose my cool in a meeting, which I've done. I have lost my ever-loving mind on a Teams meeting. Oh, yeah.
Wow. Now, I would never in my life, like say, of all of our guests, which one? And you would not have been in.
But he is a drummer, so.
Oh, there you go. It's the drummer part.
And maybe by losing my mind, I mean like I'd shut off my camera. Like, I'm going to show them. I'm shutting my camera off, right? Okay. And then maybe I make it like a little snide comment in the chat or something like that. So I recognize that. And so the next best thing for me to do is then say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I did that. I own the behavior. I own that. I'll try to do better next time. I'll try to be in a better position next time. I find that those words becoming really important. If I am distracted or detached, or if I'm dishonest about something, that owning that piece of it and saying, I'm sorry, and then following that up with something becomes important. The other thing is helping people know that they don't have to live in that space. And I do think that we need role models in our lives who do these things. Or again, I just don't think people know that they're an option for them.
Mm-hmm. It becomes an
inaccessible tool. Yeah.
What happens though if you acknowledge that, hey, I'm sorry, I messed up, here's this, but then it happens again. And it happens again as a leader. That is, and then as a follower, as an employee,
sure,
I appreciate that first time. And then the second time I kind of give some grace. By the third time though, I'm going, yeah, you don't mean it.
Yeah, this is ridiculous. Absolutely. So I talk about intentional versus accidental. So I want to get it right intentionally, right? Instead of accidentally. And there are some things that I can do to help put myself in a mind frame that start my day above the line. So I encourage folks to do some sort of mindful practice in the morning, whether that's journaling, whether that's going to the gym, whether that, like, how do you pay yourself first so that when the day goes to pot or something happens at your 10 o'clock meeting, like, you don't lose your mind. You don't shut your camera off and make a snide comment in the chat, but rather you've already invested in your heart and in your head in some spaces. And I think that's important. The other thing, part of the model is a sense of accountability. And so if we're continuously doing things that are below the line over and over and over and over again, perhaps there's a sense of like personal and self accountability around that. And I would say, why is that happening? Why do you continue to lose your cool in a meeting, or why do you continue to use curse words in front of a group of people, or whatever that might be? And what is the root cause of that? Why is that happening? And begin to investigate some of that.
Those are great examples of the personal side. Are there things on a more corporate or cultural level that you think we could ascribe to, that we could want to strive to get to? Or let me ask it maybe a different way. Are there examples of a company or companies that you're working with that are really doing a good job at this on a cultural level?
Yes, there certainly are. Here's what I'll tell you is that this is really hard work. And so asking people to think about the power of their own story. So we are continuing to do research on this space and asking people to say, where in your life did you have disorienting moments that you navigated, and what lessons did you take away from that? That's tough work for some folks. I just got back from a major metropolitan fire district where I did some work with about 150 firefighter leaders. And they were a couple of them like get this, they get the benefit of this. But other folks were like, well, when I was coming up through the firehouse, like I got hazed and I had to like scrub dirt off the back of ladders at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I had like, that's just how it happens here. So we had to pause, take time, create space, make sure people felt seen and heard in their moment. And that was their lived experience. And I get that.
Right.
But it was about doing some of that very difficult work and just asking the questions and helping people have a sense of psychological safety, which is another topic you guys have talked a lot about here on Behavioral Grooves. I find that psychological safety is so oftentimes the bedrock of anything before we can even begin to talk about above the line, below the line kinds of things.
Brad, in your experience and in the research that you've seen, when you're talking about this cultural shift, does that have to happen from top down, or can it bubble up when you're thinking organizationally?
Yeah.
Is there? Go ahead.
Yeah. So I probably have an unpopular opinion on this. I don't think that an executive team can really impact culture in a meaningful way. I think we can set the tone for it. I think we can put the resources in place. I think you can do that on your executive team. And I think that's important. I think executive teams should have a high degree of psychological safety within their executive team. But if we think like 5 levels below, like that person doesn't really think about the president of the company very often, or the CFO or the CHRO. Like that, those people don't impact my day-to-day life. You know who does? The people I sit next to, or the people I'm out in the field with, or the people I ride the truck with, or the people that I'm engaging with on a day-to-day basis. And so I think these things have to bubble up. And sometimes I'll run into somebody who's like, well, I can't impact the organization this way. No. You're 100% correct. But you can impact your team, and you should. I'm not asking you to do it because you have to. I'm asking you to do it because you can. And if you can, then you can transform the situation. And so I think an executive team needs to set the tone for this. Like this is important. This is how we're going to behave. These are our values. But I don't think they can impact it.
Yeah. So in that regard, a team leader with 4 direct reports at the very front line of the organization can kind of create their own culture, basically.
Huge. Of course. Absolutely. Yeah. I think culture is local. It is not global. I think culture is very localized.
All right. I just got my quote. I'm going to use that. I'm taking that away.
I love it.
Thank you, Brad. Quote by Brad Shuck once more.
Brad, one of the things we love about talking to you is that you are a musician also. Like I said, you are a drummer. You're not a guy that plays drums. You gig, you play, you get out of the house and you play with a band and in a whole variety of different situations. And I love that. But let's imagine that you were going to be on a desert island for a year and you had 2 musicians catalogs that you could take with you.
Okay.
So you get everything, but you only get 2 musicians. Which 2 are you going to take with you?
Okay. I can take the catalog.
Yeah, the entire, all their albums, all their.
So if you say
things,
Beatles, then you get all of McCartney and Wings and
what
George Harrison stuff. And sure, because George went off and John went off.
This is new, Tim. I thought you had to pick, Paul McCartney. Then you got all the Beatles and all of Paul and the Wings, but not George
I'm expanding
and John.
We're
changing the rules on me all the time.
I like it. So recently I have developed a real appreciation for Americana and folk singers. So Leonard Cohen comes to mind as one I would take. I am a Bob Dylan and a Woody Guthrie fan, but I probably, because they cover such a wide range, I would probably also take Mumford and Sons with me as well.
Oh, there you go.
Is there a Bob Dylan or Leonard Cohen or Pete Seeger even, or Guthrie tune?
Yeah.
It stands out that you could just say, this is a really, really good song, really important song.
Yeah. So for me, it's about stories and where I was when I heard the song. And this is going to sound a little cliche, but for me, Hallelujah by Cohen is one of those iconic, puts me in a space where my mind can rest. And I love the musicianship and the pausing and the breathing and the feeling I get. I remember listening to this song for the very first time around a fire with some really good friends of mine. And that experience has stuck with, like, I can close my eyes and put myself right back into that environment. And that song is what's playing in the background for me. And that's kind of stuck with me for 2 decades now.
It sounds like there's 2. Go ahead, Kurt.
Oh, I was just going to ask, is that the original Leonard version of it? Or is it the remake?
Was it Jeff Buckley?
Jeff Buckley redid, and then all of the other remakes are now off of that different, tonal style.
So I love the original personally. Yeah. I do. It speaks to me. Yeah, it's the original for me. I appreciate all the others, but
I don't know if you've ever heard of how long it took him to write that.
I'd have it.
And I will probably get this incorrect at some point. So listeners, if you know better than I do, please correct us. But he worked on that over years, and every verse and every line he struggled with. And there's a really interesting interview that he did where Bob Dylan talked about, I forget which one of his iconic songs. And he said, I just wrote it. And Leonard Cohen goes, I don't understand how you do that. But he also had, so I forget how many different verses are in there that he does. I think there's like 5 or 6. And then the Jeff Buckley version actually cut that down, and that's all of this. But there's an additional verse or 2. He said he had like 30, 40 others that he had.
Wow.
That he just, so there's this whole other backstory to that I think is just fascinating.
It feels like he used music as a way to understand and and think through really fundamental aspects of his life. And that speaks to me.
It sounds like you're appreciating the song on two levels. If I'm hearing you correctly here, Brad, that there is the emotional, experiential thing, but there's also something, you mentioned the musicianship and the cadence and the timing and the pauses. Can you talk a little bit about more of each of those?
Yeah. So for me as a drummer, early in my career, as a drummer, it was like, how loud can I be? How much focus can I, like, if I leave a gig and somebody's like, you killed those drums. And like, that was the best thing somebody could say to me. Like, oh, I did kill those drums. Now, if nobody even notices that I'm there, that's a huge compliment, because it means I'm in the pocket. I'm working in tandem with my other musicians. I'm looking at other people. I'm allowing the ebb and flow of the music to kind of work through us. And if I stop for even a second to think about what I'm doing, like, where's my foot? Where's my hand? Okay, I have to think about this. I'll absolutely mess it up. It has to be really it's a cognitive flow exercise for me. And I love it's one of the reasons I love Americana style music, or I love bluegrass music, for example. Also, I love the picking that happens. And I love the way that people ebb and flow in and out of those different verses and choruses, and how all of that gets picked up and then turned into something that emotionally and sometimes physically moves people.
That's fantastic. It's always such a pleasure, Brad. Thank you for sharing your thoughts about that. And thank you today for just being such a fantastic guest on Behavioral Grooves.
No, thank you all so much for having me. I cannot wait to come back again in the future.
Welcome to our grooving session, where Tim and I share ideas on what we learned from our discussion with Brad, have this free-flowing conversation, and groove on whatever else comes into our culturally informed brains.
Ain't that the truth?
It is. And this is an important piece. We think of culturally informed brains. Mm-hmm. Maybe we don't, but I do, oftentimes as the societal culture. But in work, the culture within the company is also very important in how our brains operate and see things and function, and how we thus behave. You like how I brought that all about there?
That was very nicely done. Yes. Yeah. Social norms, they matter. What do you think is let's jump right into our grooving session here. What do you think is the first thing that maybe one of the most important things that Brad talked about for you, Kurt? What rose to the top?
Gratitude.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
We've talked about this in other episodes. It's one of the things I think both you and I fully agree, and we agree on many, many things.
Yeah.
So again, the Venn diagram of us is pretty overlapped.
Yeah.
But this is one where it's right in the middle of that
we believe in it.
Yes. It's mushy. Yes. But it's also a real important part of how we interact with others, that when we demonstrate gratitude, when we show that gratitude, when people feel that gratitude, it is how we work together effectively.
Yeah. Evolutionarily, we've got this story of we need to cooperate, right? And gratitude is a foundational element of cooperation. It's just going to lead to greater job satisfaction because we feel, oh, I'm actually being identified as someone in the tribe that has some value. And that just makes me feel better. So why shouldn't we carry that through our work life? If that's part of our genetic code, why don't we carry that into our work life and express our gratitude to people?
Well, and I think
who we're doing work with.
Many of us do it naturally, and some of us do it sometimes naturally, and some people do it very rarely naturally.
Are you talking about yourself here? No.
I know. Isn't that horrible? But it's something I look at that and I go, well, do I do it as much as I should? This is where the intentionality that Brad talks about, I think, comes in very importantly in work, is this idea that we need to be thinking about this not as haphazard, just let it happen naturally, which is what we feel. Well, gratitude should be natural. It should just come from us. It should come because I feel the gratitude. No, we have to be intentional. And we know from psychological research that when people write down their gratitudes at the end of the day, it rewires our brain. Talked about this before too. This idea that what we focus on rewires what our brain is looking for throughout the rest of the day. So in other words, if I know that I'm going to be having to write down gratitude, what I feel grateful for every day, after a while, my brain starts going, oh, I'm going to have to write those down at the end of the night. I need to start looking for things, and we'll start being aware of things to be more grateful for that would have been overlooked in the past. Same thing at work. Same thing at work, Tim.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. I think you covered that beautifully. Gratitude is just so important. Actually, I will add one thing. The people who say, I just have a message for the people who say, look, I'm paying my people to come to work and do the damn job, so I don't need to express any gratitude.
Or recognize them for what they do or doing any of that, right? Yeah.
They're just doing what I'm paying them to do, so buck up, right? I just want to say, get in the real world, because the real world is not built the way, that mind is built. However you're thinking about that rational thinking doesn't really apply in the real world. And especially if you've got millennials or Gen Z people working for you, they value value. They care about value. You better be thinking about how you're going to help them see the value in their work. And that's going to start with recognition.
Employees are humans. And as you talked about this evolutionary component, it is hardwired into us, most of us. There are some few, and maybe those are the ones that get into that leadership position that then say that what you do. But regardless, most of your employees are going to be really craving this. So do it. All right, Tim, what else do we want to talk about from Brad's conversation?
Well, you teed it up at the beginning, a culture. I want to talk about culture, because culture is a big deal. Or the Peter Drucker comment, the great management consultant, about culture eats strategy for breakfast. There's
lunch
still a lot.
Dinner. Yeah.
Right. Like, there's a lot of truth in that. It's not the whole story, but there's a lot of, as with all memes, there is a lot of truth about that. And I want to encourage leaders, especially who have teams, to be thinking about not just the culture of the organization in its largest sense, but you can think about the culture of your team and have a hand in shaping that. And you can really do good work by shaping the culture of with the people that you're working with in a positive way.
Brad talked about, he thought that culture was local. And
completely,
that is something I fully buy into. I think there's an overarching story or narrative that organizations have around their culture that gives a direction. But then within the organization, how that is manifested in every team is different. And that manifestation is driven significantly by what that frontline manager, what that middle manager focuses on. And it's this really important aspect within organizations. And too often I work with managers who say, well, I don't control the culture. I don't have an influence on that. And I don't really want to do this, but I just want to slap them. I want to say, come on.
Metaphorically, right?
Metaphorically slap them. Yes.
Yeah, because Brad does argue that it's a bottom up kind of a thing, right? That the culture is a bottom up, but those team leaders, those managers, especially those frontline managers, they have a lot of influence. And even if you just think about, even if you're in that role, you think about the culture of your team.
Yes.
At the bottom of the organization, I think that's a noble cause. I think, it's a really valuable thing to be doing. And think about how you can engage the people who are reporting to you, those 6 or 8 or 10 people, in building a culture that's all your own.
So, Tim, you and I both worked at a company called BI Worldwide. We didn't overlap there, but I still did work with them, and that's how we met. But when I was there, I started off and I actually joined what was this little startup group. It was called the strategy group or the consulting group at that time. And it was headed by this guy, Steve Geiger, who I still consider one of the most influential people in my work life ever. And one of the things that he talked about is he said, we are going to change the culture of BI. And we were this little rogue group of, I think, 8 people that this idea that the culture that we built within this little team was going to emanate out into the larger organization. And I don't know if we succeeded in changing, but we did. We shifted the larger organization in a number of different ways. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really powerful when you can see those examples of that actually happening. And that was set by the leader of that group saying, we are going to create our own culture here. We are going to shift from the bigger norm into what we think the organization needs to go.
And was his boldness inspiring to you?
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
It was like, we rally people. I mean, Steve Jobs, when he took Macintosh and he separated them out, right? You hear those stories, these pirate groups, there's value in doing that and having those help inspire people to a bigger cause. Because so often we know this, we get stuck in the status quo. We are going to do what has happened because we've always done it this way.
Yeah. We can't escape that. Yeah.
And sometimes you need to have this rogue group. You have to have the pirates. You have to have the rule breakers. And to a certain degree, allow those rule breakers to be rule breakers in order to shift that.
Yeah.
I'm dropping my mic there.
Nicely done. Last thing I want to say is psychological safety was a really great part of our conversation. And I just want to kind of go back and reference Amy Edmondson's work from 1999 with Google on the project on Project Aristotle, I think it was, where that's really when I kind of became aware of psychological safety. And I love that here we are 25 years later, and we're still trying to figure out how to bring psychological safety to the workplace. And by the way, I'm not being facetious, that I'm glad that we are still wrestling with it, that it's still a prominent part of our work discussion to try to improve our work life with better psychological safety. That I think that's a good thing. We haven't gotten there. We certainly haven't gotten there, but I do think that it's worthy to continue to invest in it. And Brad, I think Brad used the term, I'm going to quote him now. He said, it's the bedrock, right? It's the bedrock of how all of our work is going to happen is with psychological safety. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And this idea, I think you've said it. I think it's the bedrock, as Brad said. I think we aren't there as much as we would like to be, that leaders still have it's my way or the highway mentality sometimes, as opposed to allowing the different voices on their team to really shine and feel safe in having those voices expressed. So
if you want innovation, you've got to have psychological safety. You have people have to be willing to say, to get back to your status quo bias thing, the way we've been doing it isn't doing enough. Let's try something new. And people have to feel psychologically safe in order to stand up and say that. The suppression of ideas is anti-innovation, basically. So don't do that.
There's your mic drop. There you go.
Boom.
All right. Well, that I think covers 3 of the important elements from our discussion with Brad. Yep.
I'm glad that it's always great talking to Brad, because his comments in that Venn diagram overlap heavily with yours and mine, right?
So we overlap here, and Brad is right on top of us. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, Groovers, we hope that you can take this conversation, some of the things that we talked about psychological safety and gratitude and recognition, and use them this week to help you go out and find your groove.